Now stanzas 5, 6, 7 and 8 take us to the next phase of the poem, where he tries to explain this celestial light what he means, to explain to himself and to us what exactly he means by this glory that has been lost. Okay, so let's read stanza 5. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, the soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. So he says, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, in the sense, our birth on earth, this earthly life, it actually denotes the forgetting of an earlier existence. We had an existence before that. This is what we mean here by, earlier I had mentioned prenatal existence. So that is the existence that we had before we were born onto this earth. And this birth here and or this life that we deal here on earth is like a sleep during which we forget all the earlier things, and we also forget where the soul came from. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath elsewhere its setting. So the soul, he puts it here in capital letters, the soul is actually the star of our life, or we can say that this soul, it is a star, it had set somewhere else, and now when you're born on earth, it is once again rising up. So just like a sun or any star for that matter, just like the stars, they set and again rise, same way our soul too had an earlier setting, and now it has once again risen through a new birth. So the soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. So this soul that we have within us, each one of us have a soul within us, and it is the soul that animates us. Even in Indian way of thinking, we have this idea that the body is only a vessel, and it is the soul that gives us life. So the body is nothing if there is no soul inside. So that is exactly what he's talking about here too. The soul that rises with us, it is actually our life's star. It gives us life, and it had had a life somewhere earlier. It had set after that life, and now it has once again risen, and it comes from afar. We don't know where from, but from a very far place our soul comes, not in entire forgetfulness. And when the soul comes, it does not just come empty-handed. It trails clouds of glory with it. So when we are born as children on earth, we actually come from heaven, because that is where we are, from afar, and that was from God, who is our home. So we came from the heavenly abode where God himself lives. So that is where we came from. So when we come from there, we just don't come alone. We trail clouds of glory. That is, children are blessed with some certain visionary powers. They when they look at anything, there is the celestial light which accompanies it. So that is the celestial light that he's trying to tell us about. So not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness means, not in entire forgetfulness means when we are little children, we still retain faint memories of the world where we came from. We generally like to say that children are very close to God, that God is very fond of children, In the Bible too, Jesus Christ had said that you should become like children, only then you have entry into the kingdom of heaven. So it is the innocence, it is the freshness of the child, it has got a dignity of its own. So that is what makes the child very important, very precious. And so he says that, and see, we like to believe, I don't know whether it's like that in all countries, but you know, when little babies are asleep, babies in the sense just a few months below 1 year and all that, when they are asleep and they smile in their sleep, the older people, the parents or the grandparents who look at the child, they say that he is talking to God, or God is telling him something very nice. That is why he is smiling in his sleep. So somehow in all cultures, I think children are linked with God. We like to believe that children are very special, and that they still retain some of the divinity of the land from which they come from. So that is what Wordsworth too is trying to say here, that we don't come just like that, but we don't forget everything. We have faint memories of where we came from, and we are not completely naked, in the sense we trail clouds of glory too as we come. And then he says, heaven lies about us in our infancy. So when we are little children, celestial element is still around us. Then the next few lines of stanza 5, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. So when you are a little baby, when you are an infant, the heaven still lingers around you. But then what happens very slowly, gradually, shades of the prison house. Prison house is the body, the material body that we wear around our soul. So the shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. As the infant grows up into a boy, a mature kind of a person, as the child grows, the prison house, or the body, or the bodily influences and the bodily instincts, it close around him, and as a result you cannot see the it kind of shuts out the celestial glory. But he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. So he says, now he looks at the various stages in a person's life. When you are an infant, very close to God, you grow a little more and you kind of begin to lose sight of God, because your prison house, your bodily influences start overpowering you. And but even a boy can still feel the presence of this divine light, and when he moves around, he can still perceive it. And when you are young, the youth who is moving farther away from the east. Now east, you should remember here, earlier there was this reference to the sun, the soul as a star, and so the star setting and rising. So here it is somewhere in the east that the sun rises. We know that the sun rises in the east. So east is where the divine is. East is where God is. So in our life journey, what happens? We begin from the east, but we keep traveling towards the west. Means we are moving farther and farther away from the heavenly abode. So that's why he says, the youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still a nature's priest, and by this vision splendid is on his way attended. So even when a person is young, in the prime of his youth, he can still perceive these elements of divinity. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. And finally, when does this light, the celestial light or this heavenly glory, completely die away? It is when you mature into an adult. And what happens then? The man, so you saw the 3 stages or the 4 stages: infancy, then there is this mention of boyhood, and then you have the youth, and finally by the time you become a man, your this celestial light simply fades away and it just blends with the common daylight. And there is nothing special for you to perceive. So that is what is mentioned in stanza 5 about how this celestial light is something that accompanies us from the time we are born, but then it slowly dies down. Now, as you listen to this, many of you might be thinking that what Wordsworth says about the celestial is not actually very convincing. You might feel that it's kind of too fanciful an imagination. And there were many contemporary critics themselves who felt that this poem was kind of very silly, and Lord Byron called it puerile poetry. Because many people couldn't identify with this idea of the celestial light and the child being especially endowed by God and all that. And they felt that it was just a very kind of too romantic notion of Wordsworth. But whatever, when we deal with a poem written by Wordsworth, the best thing is to try to look at it as he is trying to, he wants us to, because that is what let us try to put ourselves in Wordsworth's place and look at the world as he saw it. Okay, that would solve a lot of problems for us as readers. There is this, Coleridge's idea of the willing suspension of disbelief. So when you read certain things, you need to stop questioning it too much if you really want to enjoy it. So I guess that is the policy we can follow when we do this poem too. Now we are going on to the next stanza, stanza 6, which is a very short stanza. Earth fills her lap with pleasures of her own, yearning she hath in her own natural kind, and even with something of a mother's mind, and no unworthy aim, the homely nurse doth all she can to make her foster child, her inmate man, forget the glories he hath known, and that imperial palace whence he came. So once you're born here on this earth, then you are the child of Mother Earth. Okay, and so what does the earth do once she gets you as her child? She tries to please you in her own way. So that's why he says earth fills her lap with pleasures of her own, because earth wants to entertain her child, the human child, and so she gives him all kinds of happiness, like she gives him wonderful things to see, the sensual kind of happiness which the earth can give us. You get to see wonderful things, you get to smell wonderful smells, you have tasty things to eat, wonderful things to do, you have a lot of activities for your body. So altogether, the earth tries to win over this child by giving him a lot of pleasures which are her own. So earth fills her lap with pleasures of her own, yearning she hath in her own natural kind. And even so, yearnings means the earthly, the very physical kind of yearnings that a human being feels, she gives us all that, because we know that with each age our body's demands vary. So we grow along the body and we grow along with it, and as we get more and more immersed into the pleasures of the earth, what happens is that we slowly get disconnected with the heaven from where we came from. So yearning she hath in her own natural kind, and even with something of a mother's mind, and no unworthy aim. So here she says that, the poet says that the earth acts with something of a mother's mind. See, every mother likes or wants her children to love her best. Most mothers don't like to share the love of their children with others. So in a very quite selfish manner, the earth tries to pull the child towards her. She gives him all possible joys so that he will forget his original home. And that is no unworthy aim. He says we can't blame the earth for doing that, because it is quite natural. Any mother would do that. And that is what the earth also does. So with the good intentions of a true mother, the earth tries to do all that is possible to make her foster child or man to forget the laws of his heavenly abode. And why is it mentioned here as foster child? Because the child is actually the child of God. So here man is called the foster child because he is actually the child of God. He is just given for a short span of time. He has been permitted to live on earth, and he is entrusted into the care of Mother Nature. That is why her foster child, her inmate man. Again, man is just a temporary inmate on earth because his life on earth is just a kind of a phase, a kind of a lap in his race towards God. So nature comforts man and enables him to forget the glories of the imperial palace from where he came. And as we delve deeper and deeper into the pleasures of the earthly life, we slowly forget all that we knew about the earlier life. So that is stanza 6. Now going on to stanza 7. Behold the child among his newborn blisses, a 6 years darling of a pygmy size. See, where amid work of his own hand he lies, fretted by sallies of his mother's kisses, with light upon him from his father's eyes. See, at his feet some little plan or chart, some fragment from his dream of human life, shaped by himself with a newly learned art, a wedding or a festival, a mourning or a funeral, and this hath now his heart. And unto this he frames his song. So now the scene shifts. In stanza 7, Wordsworth is talking about a particular child. He is here talking about a 6-year-old boy, and here the reference is to Hartley Coleridge, the son of Coleridge. So maybe Wordsworth went to, because they were neighbors, Coleridge and Wordsworth, they were great friends and neighbors. So he must have visited Coleridge's place, and there he must have met the child. And what was the child doing? The 6-year-old child. That's why he says, look at that child, behold the child among his newborn blisses. Newborn blisses because the child is involved in some games, and for the child everything is a newborn bliss, because for him everything on earth is new. Any new game, we know that the child is curious about everything, because everything for him is the first time that he's seeing it or doing it. And so the novelty, till the novelty wears off, the child finds everything very exciting. So here he looks at this child, he sees the child sitting there on the floor with many things around him, maybe his toys and such things. So that's why he says, look at the child among his newborn blisses, a 6 years darling of a pygmy size. Pygmies, you know, are dwarfs. So a small little darling who is 6 years old. And then he says, just look at what he is doing. What is he doing? Where amid work of his own hand he lies, fretted by Sally. So then he is sitting there and he is engaged in some kind of a game, and his mother keeps kissing him in between. He's fretted in the sense he's irritated, he's disturbed by the sallies of his mother's kisses. His mother is so fond of him that she can't help kissing him in between. So he brushes her off. You know how it is when children are engaged in something and you go and kiss them and hug them, they just push you off. So same way here, the child is fretted, he's irritated by his mother's kisses, and his father, he looks upon the child with so much of love. That is why, with light upon him from his father's eyes. So the father looks at the child with so much of love and affection. The child is the least bothered about his father's affections or his mother's kisses. He's busy engaged in some kind of a game there. See, at his feet some little plan or chart, some fragment from his dream of human life, shaped by himself with newly learned art, a wedding or a festival. So maybe the child has drawn a picture, or maybe the child imagines certain things. We know how when we were children we play as we are, the family game, in the sense like somebody is the mother, somebody is the father, and we have small spoons and plates with which we pretend as if we are cooking and we are eating and all that. So same way here too, this boy is involved in doing some such activity, and he's got a chart. Chart only means maybe a picture where he has drawn something in after his own design. Newly learned art might be the art of drawing or the art of writing. So he has shaped something on his own, and he has some plan in his mind. Maybe it's a wedding, maybe it's a festival, maybe a mourning or a funeral, and whatever has this heart, means whatever he finds attractive at that time, he's busily engaged doing that, and unto this he frames his song. And then he will fit his tongue to dialogues of business, love or strife. And so sometimes he sings songs, sometimes he says dialogues, because again we are familiar with all this, isn't it? When we are little children, when we play such games, we also talk like adults. We imitate the dialogues of adults, and we use those dialogues when we play. So same way here too, the child, he tries to fit his tongue to dialogues of business, love or strife. Why does he try to fit his tongue? Because he is not an adult. He is still a little boy, so he has to take some trouble in order to talk like an adult. But as part of the game, he does all that. But it will not be long ere this be thrown aside, and with new joy and pride, the little actor cons another part. So very soon the child will tire of this game. That is how children are. They don't play any one game for a long time. For some time they'll play something, suddenly they'll leave it there. And you show him something else, he'll leave what he was doing there, he'll come running after you. And then he will leave that also after some time. Anything and everything that he sees, he's curious and he'll run after that. So same way here, before long, he'll throw this game aside, and then with new joy and pride, he will go and play another part. The little actor cons another part. So a con artist is a fraud, somebody who plays many parts, somebody who is an imposter, who pretends to be somebody else. So here, in a very endearing manner, he tells this little actor will very soon con another part. Means he will take up the role of somebody else. Filling from time to time his humorous stage with all the persons down to palsied age that life brings with her in her equipage. So he says that the child will pretend to play many roles in his humorous stage. Humorous stage here, he only means to say that life is a stage, just like Shakespeare said that life is a stage, and where all of us have different roles to play. Same way here, the child too plays various roles on his stage, and sometimes he behaves like a young boy, sometimes he pretends to be a young man, at other times he pretends to be an old man. So that's why he fills it with the stage with all the persons down to palsied age. Palsied age is when you're old and when you are trembling. So sometimes children like to pretend as if they are old men. And all these are various stages that life brings with her in her equipage. So life is accompanied, or life in her, in the course of life, these are all stages that we have to go through compulsorily. And so the child, without knowing the importance of what he is doing, he very innocently plays the roles of the adults, as if his whole vocation were endless imitation. So as if his whole vocation means as if the child was born in order to imitate others. That is what he means here by saying that as if his whole vocation were endless imitation. So the child goes on playing one part and then another and then another, as if he was born in order to imitate others or imitate the elders. So there you can see how he looks at a child. The poet looks at a child and observes what the child is doing, and he is quite enamored watching the activities of the child, and he tells us what the child is doing. So that is the end of stanza 7. Now let's go on to stanza 8. Thou whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity, thou best philosopher, who yet doth keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind, that deaf and silent readest the eternal deep, haunted forever by the eternal mind. Mighty prophet, seer blessed, on whom those truths do rest which we are toiling all our lives to find, in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave. So he says that he again looks at the child and he tells the child, he addresses the child as thou whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity. So he looks at the child, the poet looks at the child and addresses him thus. He says, thou whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity. So what he means to say is that he says, thou little child, whose exterior semblance means his external appearance belies him. Belies in the sense it gives us a wrong impression about the child. Actually, the child's soul is more mature than an adult's, but outwardly, externally, he looks like a very insignificant creature. That is why he says here, thou whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity. Looking at you, one wouldn't guess that you had such a wide and an all encompassing soul within you. That is the idea there. Thou best philosopher, who yet doth keep thy heritage. So he calls the child the best philosopher because he yet keeps his heritage. Heritage here is what he got from the previous world. So the child yet retains some of the divine elements that he got from his heavenly abode. That is why he is called the best philosopher. And this phrase, the best philosopher, many critics have spoken very harshly about it because they simply cannot understand how a child can be called a best philosopher, and they felt that Wordsworth was needlessly kind of exaggerating the importance of a child. But as I said earlier, just let us look at it as Wordsworth wants us to look at it. So he calls the child the best philosopher, who yet doth keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind. So you are an eye among the blind. The child is an eye among the blind in the sense the child can perceive many things that an adult does not see. The adult is blind or oblivious to many of the truths of life, whereas the child can see them. So that is why the eye among the blind, that deaf and silent readeth the eternal deep, haunted forever by the eternal mind. So the others, the grown-ups, we are deaf and silent, and we always try to read the eternal deep. We kind of try to dwell on the meaning of eternity. We try to find the meaning of life and meaning of death, and we are always haunted by the thoughts of eternity. But the child can see beyond all that. That is why the child is called the eye among the blind. Mighty prophet, seer blessed, on whom these truths do rest, which we are toiling all our lives to find. So he says the child is a mighty prophet, a seer. Now, who is a seer? A seer is a visionary, somebody who can see ahead of time, a prophet. That's why he calls him mighty prophet, seer blessed. And the child very easily understands the truths which an adult has to strive throughout his life to arrive at. That is what he means here. On whom those truths do rest, which we are toiling all our lives to find. And in this attempt to find the truth, what happens to adults, to the grown-ups? They are lost in darkness, the darkness of the grave. That is, most men keep searching for this truth, but then they do not find it, and finally they end up in the grave. So till the day of their death, they search for the meaning of life, but they rarely find it. So that is why he says here that in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave. Thou over whom thy immortality broods like a day, a master over a slave, a presence which is not to be put by, to whom the grave is but a lonely bed, without the sense or sight of day or the warm light, a place of thought where we in waiting lie. Now the next point that he says is this. He addresses the child and tells him that the child understands immortality better because your immortality broods over you like the day, in the sense that the truth about immortality, about life and death, it hovers immediately above the child. It's always there. So the child is not at all worried about death or about the grave and such things. Like a master over a slave. So just like a master hovers around near the slave, same way the knowledge about immortality hovers very close to the child. And therefore the child knows the truth of life and death. And so to whom, you can see that in brackets. So what he says there is, adults are worried about death. We are worried about the implications of death, about how our body will decay, about how we'll be put into a cold grave, we'll be alone there, and about how worms would eat through your flesh, and many such things associated with death frighten us. But for a child, death is it's just like a sleep. That's why he says, to whom the grave is but a lonely bed, without the sense of light of day or the warm light, sight of day or the warm light, a place of thought where we in waiting lie. So to a person or to the child who knows the meaning of death, he knows that death, even death, is a temporary condition, a temporary state, and after that you will be born again into a new life. So there is nothing for us to worry about. Death is just like life is not permanent, death too is not permanent. That is the idea that is conveyed there. And if you have this question in your mind whether he's talking about rebirth, like we Indians believe in rebirth, I cannot say for sure that that is what Wordsworth had in mind. But then he of course was influenced by Indian philosophy too. So but anyway, I don't want to make too wild guesses. And so here the idea is this, that the child or anybody who knows the reality of death knows that death is nothing to be worried about. It is just a bed, a temporary place where you spend the night. For the time being, all light will be shut down. You cannot see the light of the day, or you cannot experience the warmth of any light, but it is just a place of thought, a place of contemplation, where you wait till your soul is once again called in order to take a new life or a new birth. So because the child realizes all this, children are not at all worried about death, whereas the grown-up adults are always worried about death. Thou little child, yet glorious in the might of heaven-born freedom, on thy being's height, why with such earnest pains doth thou provoke the years to bring the inevitable yoke, thus blindly with thy blessedness at strife? So he says, now he looks at the child and he wonders, my dear child, don't you know what a blessed person you are? Why are you trying? Because we saw in the previous stanza, he told us that the child was trying to imitate adults. He was trying to play adult games. So he is asking the child, he is wondering, oh my dear child, you are still glorious in the might of heaven-born freedom, that is on thy being's height. It means you have such a lofty being within you, but don't you realize that? Is the question. Why are you calling upon yourself all these pains of the adult life? Why are you imitating adults? Why are you imitating, or why are you playing roles of funerals and of old men? Very soon, he says, all this will come upon you even without your bidding. So here the reference that Wordsworth makes is to the games that is played by the child, and he refers to the games played by the 6-year-old child where he is trying to imitate the grown-ups. And so he says, why do you blindly put up a strife against the blessedness of your present state? He says, very soon, my dear child, you too will lose all your talents, and the talents and your visionary powers will be curtailed, and the divinity of your soul will be lost, and you will be overburdened by the weight of earthly responsibilities, and you will soon be tied down by the weight of customs and habits of society. So that is why he says here, full soon thy soul shall have her earthly freight. Freight is the luggage or the weight that is carried in a ship, the load that is carried in a ship. So very soon you will be burdened by the earthly freight. You will have all kind of problems to face, and custom lie upon thee with a weight heavy as frost. Custom is the traditions and the conventions of the world. The society will demand that you do certain things as the others do. So all that will weigh down upon you, and it will lie upon thee with a weight heavy as frost and deep almost as life. So just like when frost accumulates on a flower or on a plant, the plant will shrivel up because of the cold, and the flower will dry up, and it will get withered away. Same way, the very same thing will happen to the child too. Very soon he will be overburdened by the freight of his earthly responsibilities, and he will not be able to shake away the snow or the frost that life falls on him, and this weight will be as heavy as life itself and as deep as life itself, and you will be unable to escape from it. So that is the end of stanza 8.